So I've had some time to reflect on the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity and their reversal of the Chevron doctrine last week. And it's kicked up a big question that not enough people are asking. And that is, why? Why would the six conservative justices want to do this? Why would Trump ask for something as outlandish as total immunity and the court even agree to hear it, let alone give it to him? And why now? Why 5 months before the election would they flex their muscles in this way? I mean, how did Trump get 3 SCOTUS picks during his presidency, knowing they'd all support his plan to overturn Roe amongst the dozens of other rights and regulations that they've reversed? And are these events all random and just coincidence? Or are they part of a planned conspiracy that is decades in the making? Now, we often hear MAGA Republicans projecting that senior Democrats of neoliberals are part of some kind of secret club trying to control the world order. Well, that is partly right. The world is more liberal by definition of evolution and integration and multicultural. But there's no conspiracy. It happens by osmosis. Bill Gates isn't running the show, despite what Republicans might want you to think. And I refer to this rhetoric as projection for good reason. And it's because that's exactly what it is. Conservatives have successfully programmed their own people in a game of bait and switch. They want you to look over here at Bill Gates and Hillary Clinton, whilst over there, they're planning and now committing the greatest act of political deception in US history: the systematic removal of laws, protections, and rights. Now, if they did all of this in a day, people would obviously notice, but the gradual erosion of American freedoms results in a completely changed country, created in the image of conservatism and libertarianism, a lawless society where the white, rich, and powerful get away with murder, and everyone else is criminalized for trivial acts. But who is this cabal of conservatives exactly? Who are the people behind this movement? Who decided to make this happen and do it now? The Federalist Society, with support and contributions from the Heritage Foundation, authors of Project 2025. Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse gave a speech 5 years ago, warning that this could happen. And I'd like to cherry pick some of his quotes. Now, he warned that nearly 90% of Trump's appellate judges and both his Supreme Court judges are members of this Federalist Society. He talked about 3 effectual Federalist Societies. The first is a debating society for aspiring lawyers. The second, a highbrow think tank seeking to further conservative and libertarian judicial principles. But the third is the nerve center for a complicated apparatus that does not care much about conservative principles like judicial restraint or originalism or textualism. This Federalist Society is the vehicle for powerful interests, which seek not to simply reorder the judiciary, but to acquire control of the judiciary to benefit their interests. This third Federalist Society understands the fundamental power of the federal judiciary to rig the system in favor of its donor interests, and it's willing to go to drastic lengths to secure that power. Now, the story of the Third Federalist Society is partly the story of a man named Leonard Leo, the Society's executive vice president. Mr. Leo is now the most influential person shaping our federal judiciary. And don't be surprised if you're listening and you've never heard of him. He's never been elected. He's not accountable to any voter. Instead, he's the front man for interests that work to use the Federalist Society and its surrounding network of front groups and PR shops and think tanks to acquire control over the courts. Renowned court watcher Jeffrey Toobin describes Leo as Trump's subcontractor on the selection of Supreme Court justices. More accurately, Mr. Leo is the subcontractor for a network of big corporate interests and front groups. In the summer of 2016, it was Leo who delivered the list of potential nominees to fill the vacancy left by the death of Antonin Scalia and the blocking of Merrick Garland. It was Mr. Leo who was involved in the Trump transition, helping to conduct outreach to potential Supreme Court picks, including Neil Gorsuch. Mr. Leo even orchestrated $1 million donation to Trump's inauguration. Now, the Federalist Society does more than just pick the judges. They prepare them. They study the prospective nominees and the senators who will ask them questions. They gather murder boards for nominees to practice for confirmation hearings. In the Judiciary Committee hearings, where nominees parrot empty words about applying law to fact and respecting precedent, and then, once confirmed and on the bench, those nominees deliver dependably for the partisan and corporate donors behind this Federalist Society operation. And boom, there goes women's rights. And then trans people and immigrants and people of color, and the only ones left standing are rich white Christian nationalists. It's not rocket science. It's part of a coordinated plan to take America back to the Wild West, where wealthy landowners and gun owners get to do what they want without fear of rules or regulations or integration. They fear becoming a minority in their own country, the country they stole from the Native American people. So they invented the Great Replacement theory and rallied against the separation of church and state. They literally put the fear of God into people. In 2017, the Federalist Society took $5.5 million via an entity called Donors Trust. Donors Trust has its sole purpose to launder the identities of donors to other groups so that Americans don't know the real backers of the groups. It's an identity removal machine for big donors. Through the hard work of investigators and journalists and researchers, we've learned that the Koch brothers are among the largest, if not the largest, contributors to Donors Trust. How do we know that these groups have a big agenda before the courts? We know because they also fund a fleet of front groups that file so-called amicus briefs before the courts, signaling what results the big donors want. The Kochs, the Bradleys, the Mercers, and their ilk spend millions to pursue an anti-regulation, anti-union, anti-environment agenda. And they use the Federalist Society to stock the judiciary with judges who will rule in their favor. And then there's the Judicial Crisis Network, led by a disciple of Leonard Leo, a former clerk for Justice Clarence Thomas. The Judicial Crisis Network has been described as Leonard Leo's PR organization. Nothing more and nothing less. When it comes time to muscle a judicial nominee through Senate confirmation, the JCN swings into action. Media campaigns, attack ads, big spending, that is the JCN's world. Like its Federalist Society partner, the JCN gets massive sums of dark money, and it spends massively too. It spent $7 million on campaigns to block Merrick Garland from getting a hearing on his nomination to the Supreme Court, and it spent $10 million to support the nomination of Neil Gorsuch. The Federalist Society's goal was to pack the judiciary through judicial selection with judges who will deliver what it called regulatory reform, an extreme anti-regulation, anti-union, anti-environment agenda for those corporate Federalist Society funders. And now they have succeeded. It's done. Their work is done. Here's a quote from the book The Federalist Society, How Conservatives Took the Law Back from Liberals by Danielle McLaughlin and Michael Avery. The dockets of the federal courts are brimming with test cases brought or defended by Federalist Society members in the government and in conservative public interest firms to challenge government regulation of the economy, roll back affirmative action, invalidate laws providing access to the courts by aggrieved workers, consumers, and environmentalists, expand state support for religious institutions and programs, oppose marriage equality, increase statutory impediments to women's ability to obtain an abortion, defend states' rights, increase presidential power, and otherwise advance a broad conservative agenda. There are Federalist Society lawyers in every major US city, as well as London, Paris, Brussels, and Toronto, and student chapters at every accredited law school in the country. The organization is huge. I mean, their website alone shows 50 full-time staff, in addition to the board of directors and advisors and contributors. Members of the Federalist Society decided that the easiest way to change the law is to change the judges. And consequently, they have moved the federal judiciary significantly to the right over the past 30 years, and the law has followed. The ideological foundation for this significant movement was a deliberate elevation of the doctrine of originalism. Under the rubric of American exceptionalism, members of the Federalist Society are promoting a doctrine of new sovereignty, which rejects international law and international institutions, including the United Nations, if they interfere with the United States' absolute right of self-determination. This doctrine holds up that precedent as commander-in-chief in the final arbiter of what is legal under domestic or international law, and may even ignore acts of Congress if they conflict with the president's agenda pertaining to war and foreign policy. It rejects any role for international law in interpreting the Constitution. The Conservative majority also solidified another Federalist Society sacred cow: support for big business. In 3 decisions, the court narrowed the scope of federal employment discrimination protections, protected the makers of generic drugs from lawsuits from consumers damaged by defects in product design, and sharply limited class action lawsuits for violation of antitrust laws. In fact, Forbes wrote a piece today entitled, "Finally, some great news, Supreme Court strikes down Chevron doctrine," claiming it had enormously and dangerously increased the powers of government agencies. You see, businesses want to make massive profits at whatever cost to humanity. Except regulation is what keeps us safe, not just in the US, but in countries all around the world. And it relies on experts, not lawyers or judges, to advise on policy. A key group behind the Supreme Court challenge, the New Civil Liberties Alliance, was founded with seed money from the oil billionaire Charles Koch. Lawrence Tribe, professor of constitutional law at Harvard Law School, said on social media, "The administrative state just died. The imperial judiciary has relegated Congress to a secondary role." And so, the plan has taken shape. This is a political coup from the top down. Giving Donald Trump immunity from prosecution is just a small part of the plan to install MAGA Republican and far-right Christian nationalist thinking at all levels of government, the judiciary, and society. Trump, he was their useful idiot. They used him. And he then used the people to enrich himself. And they're still paying into his fund. And this is where we're at now. The United States of America is not the country that it was when I moved here in 2017. It has fundamentally changed in 8 short years. Their plan is to install Donald Trump, not as a president, but as king. Even if he loses the election, it doesn't matter. The courts are now in place to side with him and overturn the election result. Now, the only way to change it is to have your voice heard, to protest, either online or in the streets, to harass your elected representatives, and most importantly, to vote. Because the only way to make the point that you do not want the United States to fall into autocracy is for Joe Biden to win in a landslide. So vote for the Democrats in November like your life depends upon it, because he needs to win all 3 branches of government. And only then can Congress impeach the conservative justices that have been bought and paid for. And only then can women get their right to choose back. And only then can we feel safe drinking water from the tap. And only then can children go to school with the knowledge that the adults attempted to protect them from active shooters. This is the most important election in American political history. Make it count. I'm Anthony Davis. You can hear me on the 5 Minute News podcast and YouTube channel. You can see me co-hosting Uncovered every Wednesday, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.